right of His Majesty's government, I am here tonight. I know the sacrifice you have made to be here. Many of you, I know, are estranged from the lives you once had. Yet I feel your spirit tonight. For 50 years, we have labored peacefully to secure the vote for women. We've been ridiculed, battered, and ignored. Now we have realized that deeds and sacrifice must be the order of the day. We are fighting for a time in which every little girl born into the world will have an equal chance with her brothers. Never underestimate the power we women have to define our own destinies. We do not want to be lawbreakers. We want to be lawmakers. Be militant, each of you in your own way. Those of you who can break windows, break them. Those of you who can further attack the sacred idol of property, do so. We have been left with no alternative but to defy this government. If we must go to prison to obtain the vote, let it be the windows of government, not the bodies of women, which shall be broken.
Round the back, Liz, round the back.
I incite this meeting and all the women in Britain to rebellion. I would rather be a rebel than a slave.
Dear Emily.
This is Mrs. Watts, Mrs. Pankhurst. Maud.
Thank you, Maud. Never surrender. Never give up the fight.
Welcome. That was a clip from an incredible film called Suffragette. The director, Sarah Gavron, is actually here this evening. He is, I believe that is correct. Set in England 100 years ago. It's always humbling and exciting to be at this conference and be surrounded by such passionate artists and activists, and this panel is no exception. I'm going to go from the end. We're very fortunate to be joined tonight by an Academy Award-winning filmmaker from Pakistan whose films focus on marginalized communities around the world. Her latest film, Song of Lahore, premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival last weekend. Charmaine Obad Chinoy. Our next guest is writer, producer, director, distributor, most recent feature film, as we all know, Selma, nominated for the Academy Award for Best Picture. Ava DuVernay, we're very excited.
Thank you.
And the #1 seed at the Oscars. Meryl Streep. Well, you know, let's start chronologically. I think that'd be the way to go. That film takes place 100 years ago, so we'll begin there. Suffragettes. Your role in it, I was surprised to see you try and take on an accent. I thought...
Yeah.
And I thought actually quite credibly.
Thank you.
Talk about how you got involved in the project, Suffragette.
Well, it's a wonderful story. This is this scene is sort of anomalous. This is Emmeline Pankhurst, who was sort of the inspirational head of the women's movement to get the vote in England, and that movement was different from the one in the United States, which was very polite. In England, it was violent. And one of the most violent things they did was that after petitioning Parliament for 50 years, politely, nicely, and doing it the right way to get the vote, finally they realized that it wasn't going to happen, and they started blowing up the greens of all the best golf courses around London. That got their attention. And yeah, it was, but you know, it was all about sort of wrecking property, not hurting people. But I mean, I grew up, my grandmother had 3 children, and my mother among them, and still couldn't vote, not in the school board election. Never mind president. She didn't care who was president, but she really cared about who was the school board. So it was personal to me. And yes, it's 100 years ago, but it's, as you get older,
What?
that seems like nothing.
Uh-huh. I understand.
So-
But it's interesting because it puts it into perspective to some extent. You know, we all know the arc of the moral universe is long and it bends towards justice. But I imagine when you are on that part of the bend that is straight, that is cold comfort. And so we flash forward maybe 30 years, 40 years, and in the film Selma, they're dealing with almost the exact same question of basic equality and justice. When you see it through the perspective of groups that continue to have to face these fundamental questions, does that change the lens through which you view a film like Suffragette as well?
I mean, it just reminds that we're on a continuum, that this is all linked, much like the beautiful panel before us. What is done here affects what's done here. And I think when you look at all of these justice movements, people who have been, striving to amplify their voices so that they can participate in the political process from India to England to the United States, all of the fracturing of our voting body in the United States, when and how people were able to win their rights, rights that were on the books and not enforced. All of that is intertwined. So I think these two films are very much in conversation with each other, as is Charmine's, and so much of the art around this idea of the political as personal is really has a vibrancy now where you can see the interconnections. And so my hope is that folks that, maybe, people of color who are involved right now in the Black Lives Matter movement and some of the other grassroots movements may look at something like Suffragette and get ideas. Because, what we can do through film as we dramatize these movements is remind each other of what worked. And that we don't have to start from ground zero every time. So beyond the art of it, beyond the history of it, there's actually tactical value, I think, as well. I didn't know about blowing up golf course. That's a pretty good idea. So yeah, they're all intertwined.
And it's interesting because, you bring up, it reminds people, dramatizing the films functions as in some ways, collective memory, to remind people of just how far we've come, but how far we still have to go. But then, Charmaine, you deal in sort of more bearing witness, not recreating a mindset and a memory, but the actuality then of the continuum of the struggle as it happens in present day. And how does that change the way you view it through the lens and how you're capturing it? You're not recreating something, you're in the moment.
I have to say that it's tough because you have to live and breathe that reality with those people that you are filming, often for years. Their reality becomes your reality. Their nightmares become your nightmares. And it becomes very hard to take yourself out of that situation at the end of the film. Because that their reality may continue to be the same, whereas yours will change. I've often worked with men and women who risk their lives every day to make a community's life better, to make other people's lives better. And sometimes by shining a light on them, we highlight and amplify their voice. But sometimes when we leave, they have to face risks that come with having their voices amplified. And that's a risk as a filmmaker you take upon yourself as well. So it's rewarding because sometimes you put work out there and the lives of those that you have filmed become better. But sometimes you take big risks personally by telling their stories. And also, you have to deal with your own demons when that film is done, because you witnessed and been part of something that is often hard to move past or forget.
Let's take a look. Your most recent film, I believe, this is a woman, you're following her as she is trying to improve working conditions for indentured servants and people. Is that what we're about to see? Do you want to set it up?
Yes, Saida Fatma is, in my eyes, a warrior, a woman who rescues entire families from bonded laborers. And here she is taking on a man who employs people and actually really treats them like slaves.
All right, so let's take a look at that.
Fatma's family has made personal sacrifices for her cause. The attack has made her even more determined to achieve her goal.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम जी, आप इधर क्या आपकी है हैसियत, पोजीशन, मालिक हैं, क्या हैं? अब यहाँ पर एक मजदूर को आपने मारा, यहाँ कमरे में लिटा के मारा, कुछ छितर बना हुआ है, यहाँ पड़ा हुआ है।
ये आपको बात किसने बताई?
उसी मजदूर ने। ये कौन सा कानून है? ये जंगल में रहते हैं, हम इंसानों में नहीं रहते।
क्या हमारा हक नहीं है?
नहीं।
हम पैसे जो देते हैं,
क्यों देते हैं?
वो आप जो है ना हमारे काम को डिस्टर्ब कर रही हैं।
नहीं, मैं नहीं डिस्टर्ब कर रही, मैं नहीं डिस्टर्ब कर रही, मैंने तो उनको वो आ गए हैं।
तो आप कह दें ये कारोबार मत करो, हमें कह दें।
नहीं, आप करें, लेकिन ऐसा कारोबार नहीं करें जिसमें आप लोगों को मारपीट करें।
चलो भी चल, ਤੁਹਾਡੇ कोई काम नहीं गए थे, निकलो।
हम यहाँ पे
कोई बंदा साढ़े लागे ना लगे।
अगर आपने बंद नहीं किया तो तोड़ना पड़ेगा।
साहब मेरी बात सुने, नहीं आप गलत काम नहीं कर रहे हैं। आप जैसे पढ़े लिखे लोग ये इस तरह की बात करें।
अच्छा, इस तरह आराम से बात करें।
हमने आपके साथ ये
अच्छा, चुप कर जाइए बेटा।
मैं नहीं चुप करती, कराया मुझे चुप। मैं आपकी गुलाम नहीं हूँ। यहाँ मजदूरों को आप बंद करके मारते हैं, मैं आपकी गुलाम नहीं हूँ।
कौन सा बंदा?
I thought it was interesting that it starts out as a one-on-one interview and then it turns into a board meeting. And everybody from the company starts to show up. But how do you counsel that individual? Is that individual emboldened by the camera? Do you offer a bit of veil of protection there? And when it's removed, does that make her more vulnerable? Or is this the activism as it happens?
This is the activism as it happens. And I think it's very important to highlight that, because very often we see women in my part of the world as victims, as women who are mistreated. You know, we need to have heroes. We need to have strong, brave women, and we need to have their voices amplified.
Right.
You know, I have two daughters. I need my daughters to have heroes in Pakistan from my part of the world. And I need to amplify their voices. I'm doing it very selfishly, I have to say, because these are the women who you never hear about. And when you do bring their voices to the fore, other people will be tempted to walk in their footsteps, will see that there are people who are opening doors. So in some way, I'm hoping that by highlighting all of this, by putting my camera out there, that I am creating heroes for the next generation in my part of the world.
Yeah. And is that, no, getting back to, so, you know, we see the evolution of this moment, and as Ava was saying, it's all a continuum. You know, when you watch that suffragette scene in there, and you can't help, and maybe as a person of color, you view it through a different lens, because I do look out of that and I see there are no people of color in that, and it's almost as though these people have to get their rights, and then these people are allowed to get their rights, and then these people are allowed to get their rights. But it's the same right.
Yeah.
And is it a frustration to see that take so long to be recognized, and how do we advance that ball more expeditiously?
Well, one of the things that I learned making this film, which I wasn't aware of, was that the whole idea of passive resistance, the women, I think I didn't see the whole clip, but I think you see where the police come in, and this was very difficult because it was never seen in the papers. It wasn't publicized. So they'd have these rallies, and this huge battalions of police would come in, and they'd really beat the women pretty badly. And the women couldn't fight back, so they just went limp. And some of the photographs that did make their way out were terrifying because they seemed, and powerful because they couldn't resist. And Mahatma Gandhi was a student in London during this time, and he saw these demonstrations, and he saw the power of that passive resistance, and he took it back with him to India. And Martin Luther King learned from, so yeah, the seeds of...
Gandhi could have very easily said, like, hey, this breaking windows thing. I did that.
Yeah, and the...
Whole different
And then
world.
the whole history
different world.
changes
Yeah,
at that point.
yeah. But it is true that we live...
Beyond that, do you, Ava, view that struggle through a slightly different lens, not just as a woman, but as a woman of color, as an artist? How does that affect the way that you work through those?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the beautiful thing about art making and even consuming art is we all are experiencing it through our own gaze. So, you know, I mean, in general, when I'm in groups of women or, you know, watching something about the suffragist movement, you know, there is the question of, you know, where are the sisters? And so that was a real struggle. I don't know as much about you know, the struggle in the UK, but there's, you know, that's its own 3 movies about, you know, the kind of idea of divide and conquer that was used, you know, against and within the
Absolutely,
movement.
because the women's movement began with the abolitionist movement.
That's right.
And they were together. Frederick Douglass, B. Anthony were allies.
Ida B.
And
Wells,
then-
Sojourner Truth. I mean, there was a lot of strategy along those lines, which is something that I love that we were able to get to in Selma, is the strategy behind these tactics. And at one point in the United States, the women's movement, there was a very strategic effort to say, we can gain this if we, you know, pivot less from all women and focus on, you know, because if we include the Negro vote, there might be a watering down of the power of our cause. And so there's a lot of strategy there, but yes, I mean, I think that's, you know, we all bring who we are to this work as art makers, as art lovers, and the consuming and the sharing of it. That's what it's about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You talked about strategy, and I thought that was an interesting point because in each of those films, there are moments where the leader of the resistance movement, whether it be Pankhurst, whether it be Martin Luther King, is aware that through their actions, they will bring some suffering to the individual activists who are going to receive the brunt force from either the authorities or whatever, and that is part and parcel to creating the images and amplifying it that will allow these movements to catch.
But that's interesting. I mean, that's from what you're talking about.
Right.
You know, the use of public amplification of the protests that you depict in Suffragette were not being amplified through the press. Were
Right.
not being amplified, you know, in the way that King and the SCLC and other civil rights movements used it, or the way that folks, you know, in grassroots movements now are using the images, whether they're captured, you know, on cell phones or whether they're being created
Right.
for camera. And so I find it interesting that that wasn't what was compelling, you know, the women during this time, and that it was happening under kind of cover of night and no one knew about it, and yet you go and you do it again.
But it was very subversive too, because while it was I think that it was subversive because it crossed class lines, and nothing else in England ever did. And so it was like the women's movement and all civil rights movements cut across lines of difference, and that's actually what's most threatening to the status quo.
What do you think? It brings us to an interesting point when we talk about, so now we're jumping ahead to this is happening now. And so you are watching the lessons of, and it's a dramatization of the lessons of it. As an activist and an artist, do you make that calculation? Who is my target? You talked a little bit about, I want women to watch this, and I want them to feel empowered, and I want my daughter to have heroes. I couldn't help but notice a thread through each of these, that the men were assholes. And I'm wondering, as one of them, what is the balance of activating a force for change, but also trying to permeate that patriarchy, that power structure? And is that a part of the calculation of your art as well? And what's been the reaction to that?
Oh, absolutely. I like to make men uncomfortable. I enjoy making men uncomfortable. Not you, just
Not
you
you,
know,
not
you.
Point taken, point taken.
But, you know, it is important to be able to look into the eyes of a man and say, I am here, and recognize that. And recognize that I am working to bring something that makes you uncomfortable, and it should make you uncomfortable, because you need to change your attitude. And it's only when you're uncomfortable, when you're shifty, when you have to have difficult conversations, that you will perhaps look at yourself in the mirror and not like the reflection, and then say, maybe there is something wrong with the way I think, or maybe there is something wrong with the way I am addressing this issue. So I'll tell you, last year, I began working on a television show that brought stories like this in Pakistan, and men were uncomfortable with some of the issues that we were talking about, extremely uncomfortable, but they started having those difficult conversations. And I think that if more men and women started doing that, looking, you know, in the eyes of people and saying, well, this is the reality, accept it. I come from a country which sometimes thinks that I'm a traitor because I talk about issues that shouldn't be talked about, that these are the issues that should be swept under the carpet. So you will see a lot of rants about me on social media, and that is part and parcel of who I am, and sometimes that used to bother me. But one day I realized that it should be my strength, not my weakness. And the reason it should be my strength is because obviously I am making someone very uncomfortable. And it's only when you make someone uncomfortable that they're forced to tweet about you, you know? So I think that's important. And I now put all the naysayers to one side because I know I have a mission. And I know what I want to do. And those voices, just their volume just needs to be toned down.
I just love the idea of in your films, if Twitter had been around, just Martin Luther King on the thing, you know, they will tweet about us, you know, and just really yell and scream. And how does brings us to an interesting point. How has technology changed this? You know, Ava, you spoke earlier about, you know, these images that are being captured now on cell phones. Technology has democratized the idea of who can bear witness. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's clear that the proliferation of cell phones is quicker than the police's recognition that people have cell phones. That has created an enormous disparity. But there is great power within those images. You're now working also on documentaries about the injustices within our legal system and those types of things. How do you account for how technology has changed these types of activism?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if technology has democratized who's able to bear witness, because, you know, communities of color, communities of women, communities of marginalized people have always borne witness, but they've not been valued by the dominant culture. And so, it's the parallels between what was happening in 1965 with, the civil rights movement really orchestrating at times photo opportunities around the violence that was going to naturally occur in order to activate the contents of the nation. And what's happening now, very organically, through all of this, horrible footage, dash cam footage, body cam footage, cell phone footage, that is now activating our nation's attention and activism around this, is to say, let me say, I feel like we're starting to have a bit of cell phone blindness, like it's coming, It has to be as bad as Eric Garner to get your attention. It has to be as bad as, Freddie Gray to get your attention. Like everything that's come out in the past 2 months, every week, a new case. The cell phone footage, the dash cam footage, the body cam footage, has to be more violent, more, crass, more, evil to even make a headline. And at what point is there a cumulative effect where we actually all take action? And what point do we start to kind of, tune out because it hurts too much or it's too painful or it seems to be too big? It seems to be too big.
Right.
And so, the question there is, it didn't stop from 1965 to 2015.
Right.
There was just not a camera on it. And yet the activism around it stopped when there wasn't a camera on it. So I think, how technology, how our use of the image plays into what we actually do is a question that's up for grabs because, there's precedent for there being a fall off when we start to, become very used to the image. And unfortunately, these images are so horrific that, people are more apt to turn away than to lean into it.
Yeah, but I think that the more, in a weird way, tweeting is, fleeting. It's just like sometimes like a flock of birds goes to this house, then it goes all over to this house, then it goes over to that house, then it goes, and then it's nowhere, and then we turn on Housewives. And it's just, it's a diversion. But the things that go deep, the things that really go deep, are the things that work to our empathy, that make us not just think about the indignities done to our own tribe, but to feel that the indignity done to someone else feels like it's happening to me. And that's where art comes in. That's where your movie comes in. I mean, I think that sometimes, I remember when in the olden days, there was this thing called Roots, and it was on television, and it was the first time that many white people had been introduced to, or had been invited to feel what it would be like to be part of a black slave family. And it worked an incredible effect across the country, really did. Mm-hmm. And similarly, I was in a thing called Holocaust, and I remember, the sort of easy, effortless anti-Semitism of New Jersey, where we grew up. And
I don't think that was a compliment
no,
to New Jersey.
but they take any compliment, don't they?
It's kind of a sad one there.
But that was another one that sort of,
Sure.
it just made little inroads, because when you're allowed to feel like the other person, like it's happening to you, you sit as a member of the audience and you feel it's happening to you. It's a powerful, meaningful thing. It's what Amir Khan was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that, and that gets to, I think, the heart of what's so exciting about activism in art and what you do. And as I watched your film, as they sit in front of a person and they look into their eyes, they have to recognize that individual's humanity. And it goes through your work as well. When I would watch Selma and you would use this footage that was, looked like news footage. But then you would pull out and you would create a three-dimensional picture about these images, like you say, that we might see and we might be inured to. But you create a full picture, and it creates a picture of an individual's humanity. And I imagine that in that situation, once you recognize another individual's humanity, you can no longer perpetrate the types of injustices that they perpetrate upon them. And is that the thing that you strive for?
That is one of the things that I strive for. But I think I also strive for the audience to look at that and put themselves in that. So it's not like I am watching the other and this happens to them and those people that live in that part of the world because they come from a certain place or a certain religious system or a certain belief, but that this could happen to me and that it is the luck of the draw that I am born here and not there. Because it really is the luck of the draw that we are here and not there, or that they are there and they're not here. And I think that it's important to take a minute to recognize that, and that's what, when people watch my films, I want them to feel that. That is my aim. And it's only when we start thinking that this could happen to us is then we feel that we should actually do something, or this is something that I should educate myself about. And so in some ways, I'd like to bridge the gap between them and us and make it all one.
It brings up an interesting issue, which is, and I ask all three of you, is this your activism, or is this, as we saw, getting the franchise is the basic justice, but that's truly the beginning of the fight for equality and is in no way the end point. And is the film that highlights that also, is this the beginning of the conversation for all three of you, the beginning of your activism as is regards to the various issues that you're dealing with?
I think that's way too intellectual a question for me.
Let me try it this way. So when you're watching Jersey Shore, are you thinking to yourself, hey, I should be doing something?
No, getting the vote is one thing, using it is another, and we're all lazy in this country.
But isn't it, you look at Ferguson, so this comes out, it creates a firestorm at Ferguson, they have an election, and suddenly there is a change in the dynamic of the city council of Ferguson. That's a real change that occurred in a period of time. The franchise made a difference to some extent.
Well, yeah.
But point taken.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, when you get into ideas of art and activism, I think for me, I really feel that when a woman makes a film, that is a radical act in and of itself, regardless of what, what is being, truly no matter what it is.
Right.
And I think, just the idea of inserting ourselves in an image where we've been absent. I feel the same about people of color who are creating images and making sure that they're seen. And so, when you start to get into, what is activism, yes, you can look at Selma and say it's a film with an activist spirit, but I mean, certainly, the very act of, she could have made a documentary about picking flowers. I mean, I think that is, which you should make it. But, her act of the art making is activism in and of itself. And I like to think of, so I don't like to think of the work I do as being not above, but more activated and more political than another woman making, the romantic comedy. Mm-hmm. I think it's all essential, it's vital. When we're absent, we're absent. And so our very presence is our political statement, in my view. Yeah.
Okay.
I was 11 years old when the first Gulf War happened, and I was in Pakistan, and I remember we only had 2 television channels, and one of the television channels had CNN for a few hours. And I remember watching Christiana Manpour reporting from, all amongst all the men, like on the front line, very fuzzy television, could barely make much out. But I saw a woman standing on the front lines, reporting, from a difficult part of the world. And I said to myself, well, if she could do it, then any one of us in this part of the world could do it. And I think that sometimes we watch something and it stays with us, and later on in life we reflect about the choices we made and perhaps the characters you've played, or the scripts that you choose. And then you think back, why did I do that? And sometimes an image comes back. And to me, what I do comes down to watching Christiana Manpour at the age of 11 on a grainy television on the First 24 News Channel.
Do you see, other stories that have caught your interest that you would like to continue to pursue this effort, but in the same way, do you view your work as just by the very act of it, by the very act of stepping into a more male-dominated area, that in itself is kind of a victory?
Well, I mean, as an actress, I'm not a producer or a director, so I sort of step into somebody else's ideas. But the women who have been directors have been largely, they've had a really rough time breaking in our business, and I'm not entirely sure. I have my theories why that is, but a lot of it has to do with imagination. And this act of empathy that women go through from the time we're little girls, we read all of literature, all of history. It's really about boys, most of it. But I can feel more like, Peter Pan than Tinkerbell. I just, or Wendy, or any of the, I wanted to be Tom Sawyer, not Becky. I mean, I thought about, and we're so used to that act of empathizing with the protagonist of a male-driven plot. I mean, that's what we've done all our lives. You read history, you read great literature, Shakespeare, it's all fellas, So, but they've never had to do the other thing. And the hardest thing for me as an actor is to have a story that men in the audience feel like they know what I feel like. That's a really hard thing. It's very hard for them to put themselves in the shoes of a female protagonist. It just is, this is known to the studios. They know it's the toughest suit of clothes to wear. For heterosexual men, I will.
I wonder, do you think it's, in some ways, it's an empathy deficit, or that it's never been required of us? Because, like you say, in the controlling interest of it, and everyone is, you can relate to Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer, that you've never had to almost feel that empathy, and maybe it's a question of, as you all will look back, you've been educating men in the same way that you've been empowering women.
I think it's a power thing, frankly. I think, when I was in college and all the colleges were female or male, and there was a big choice, we could join with Yale. I was at Vassar, but we'd have to go to their campus, we'd have to basically eviscerate our institution. And nobody wanted to do it, but basically the men, there was never any question that they would abandon New Haven. It was just
they would never be asked.
Going to a woman's college was a step down, and going to a man's college was a step up for the women.
It's interesting you say that, because I went to Smith, and the men came to Smith.
Well, the women came to Vassar too, and they still do, and but the world is better.
I guess the point is,
No, I'm
You
just.
really should go to Columbia. I just think that
No, the world is coeducational, thank God, except in many parts of it. So, you know, this is an old fight. But why are we lesser? Why are we lesser? And
do you feel that changing, Ava? Do you feel the difference?
Do I feel the difference?
Yeah, in your own journey, that, you know, the struggle that you had to make these films made, but now your talent is undeniable, your success is undeniable. Do you feel let into something, or do you feel you've created your own path and momentum?
I'll say I don't feel let into something. No. No. I mean, I think, you know, as a woman who's made 3 narrative feature films and a handful of docs, you know, we, you know, still have to start again from zero every time.
Right.
And whereas, you know, my white male counterparts don't have to start from zero every time. And so I think to be let in is to just know what you're doing 2 years from now, because you know there's going to be something else there. And for women filmmakers, that's not the case. Now, what do you do with that? I love the idea of, you know, self-determining and not asking for permission, not waiting for anyone to say, this is what you're doing 2 years from now. I love what Meryl's just done in funding a lab for screenwriting women over 40 who can be, you know, self-determined in what they're doing. Fist bump. You know, I love the idea of, you know, this sister going out, you know, in places that we would never go and putting a camera. I mean, as I just watched that footage, I was like, where's the camera? And are you all safe as you record this, you know, and doing those things without permission. And so ultimately, it's not about the architecture around what we do or the industry around what we do. It's about what we do.
It's just
and it has
not
to
stopping,
continue,
right.
It has to continue to be done without waiting for who's letting us in or who's keeping us out. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank all of you. You know, as someone who just admires your talents as filmmakers, and as an actor, I want to thank you for inspiring me and certainly allowing me to have that sense of feeling and to not always feel like an asshole. No, good. But I want to bring. I just thank you so much. The work that you guys do is so amazing and so moving and so powerful, and I truly appreciate it. And I thank you for being here. I want to bring Tina back out if she's still here. There we go.
You know, listening to that amazing panel, I was thinking that somewhere out there was an 11-year-old girl looking at these 3 amazing women and listening to them and wanting to be every single one of them. And Jon Stewart, we are going to miss you so badly. The fact that you are leaving The Daily Show after 16 years of laughter and intelligence, the official day of mourning for this nation begins on August the 6th, and we will miss you every single night. So, thank you so much, my 3 heroes. You're 4 heroes. You're an extraordinary, extraordinary panel. It was really wonderful. And I want to thank as well the other extraordinary people we've had on this stage tonight. Yassin Eldal, Zaida Muna, Edith Schlaffer, Amir Khan, Bushra Awad, Robbie Damlin, and the unforgettable Markisha Babas. They were all so moving, so brave, so giving of themselves tonight. I'd like to hear a big round of applause for every one of them. And I thought our moderators tonight were absolutely stellar. Barker Dutt, India's leading news anchor. Zainab Zolbi, founder of Women for Women and a new TV show in the Middle East. And the non-asshole, Jon Stewart. Tonight was just a taste of what's to come, so get ready for more unforgettable stories tomorrow. We're going to start with a searing panel on Boko Haram and the failed attempts to bring back the schoolgirls that they abducted in Nigeria. We'll also have Her Thespian Majesty, Dame Helen Mirren, Barbara Streisand, the astonishing sister Rosemary Murambe from Uganda, and herself, Hillary Rodham Clinton. So, thank you again, everybody, for joining us at the first evening of Women in the World. We'll see you all tomorrow. And those who have a ticket for dinner on the mezzanine, just proceed up there. We've got so much to talk about, and it's all about discussion and thinking about what we heard tonight. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.